everyone. Welcome to the 2023-2024 Annual Performance Report webinar for HEP and CAMP. I'm Katrina Ballard, the OME Data and Evaluation Subject Matter Expert, and today I'm joined by my colleague who will introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Jessica Stein, and I'm a Program Officer for HEP and CAMP.
Great, thanks for all joining us today. We can go to the next slide. So during today's presentation, we are going to review how to complete the Annual Performance Report, or APR, for the 2022-2023 reporting period. Our goal is to help grantees create and submit a high-quality report. We'll introduce new data elements that are optional for the 2023-2024 reporting period that will be required for 2024-2025. We'll also go over basic information about the APR and review common errors that happen when completing the report and submitting your data. We'll share tips for creating a high-quality report, including using the optional grantee workbook and a brand new pre-submission checklist. That's also optional to check your work. Please note that if you're part of a new project, meaning your project was funded in FY 2024, which is the FY 2024 cohort, you won't be completing an annual performance report or APR this year, but you will complete an interim performance report in February 2025. So it's still very useful for you to attend this presentation to learn about OME's expectations for data collection, as the IPR elements are a subset of the APR data elements. And in addition, OME will offer office hours for the IPR and provide the IPR forms soon. So please stay tuned as we share more information on the HEP and CAMP listserv and via G5. So a couple of quick reminders before we get started. So this webinar is a recording. So if you have any questions that come up during this presentation, please jot them down and you can send us an email at hepcampapr@ed.gov, or you can bring them to the APR office hours, which will be on September 12th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. In the listserv message where we share the link to the recording for this webinar, we'll also share timestamps for each section of the presentation. That way you can view different sections at different times if needed. This year we have a lot to go over, so we're trying to make it easy for you to jump around. We also recommend sharing this recording with members of your team who work on various parts of the APR, such as staff in your budget office, for example. This webinar recording is actually split into two parts over two videos. So in this first part, we will cover the three items you see on the left. So first, we'll go over the 2023-2024 APR as an overview, and we'll also introduce a new resource. We will talk about some APR cover sheet updates, which are brand new this year. And we will go over the APR updates that we also discussed at the HEP and CAMP annual directors meeting for 2023-2024, and that covers blocks B, C, and D. Then in the second part, which will be in a second video, we're going to review APR block A definitions, tips for completing the APR, the interim performance report preview, and the submission process and next steps. So we'll start with an overview and resources for this year's APR. So the Annual Performance Report, or APR, is a report that each grantee must submit to receive continued funding under a multi-year award. The report provides the most current performance and financial information about a discretionary grant or cooperative agreement. The department requires grantees to use their APRs to report on their progress toward meeting performance measures. These are the authorities that address reporting requirements for HEP and CAMP, including legislation and regulations. For more information, you can visit our website with the links at the bottom of the screen on this slide here. So for both HEP and CAMP, OME measures progress on both the project level and the national level through our program performance measures, which previously were called GIPRA measures. The chart you see here shows the many ways OME uses the data from grantees that you all submit in the APR, IPR, and final performance reports. So on the individual level, OME reviews grantee data to determine whether the grantee has made substantial progress toward achieving program targets and objectives to award continued funding for the next year. Then on the aggregate level, OME calculates program performance and efficiency measures using APR data from all grantees. These measures are then reported to Congress and used in the President's budget request for the U.S. Department of Education. And OME is responsible for writing a report to Congress every 2 years. We're currently working on drafting the next report to Congress, which summarizes data from the 2021 and 2022 APR years, and that will be published later this year. So as you can see, it's very essential that OME receives timely and accurate IPR, APR, and FPR submissions from grantees because these data are used for decision-making at multiple levels of the HEP and CAMP program. APRs are aligned with the 12-month budget period. So this year, APRs will be due on Thursday, October 17th. And again, it's really important that you submit your APR on time, as the program office uses data from the APR to determine whether grantees have made substantial progress and to inform the issuance of non-competing continuation awards. Also, all grant recipients are required to submit a final performance report in the last year of their grant. So the final performance report is due this year, Monday, October 28th, if your project is an FY 2019 cohort grantee. However, if you receive no cost extension from ED for the 5th year of your grant, then the final performance report is due 120 days after the revised project period end date. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to your program officer. One quick note, in addition, throughout the presentation, we'll use reporting period and budget period interchangeably. When we refer to the previous budget period, we're talking about 2022-2023. So now I'll hand it over to Jessica and she'll review the different parts of the APR.
Thank you, Katrina. All project directors should have received 4 files on July 24th and July 29th. These files include the cover sheet, the performance report data form, the grantee student workbook, and the instructions. Please contact us if you did not receive these files. You can also access them on the OME website. The APR is organized into 2 files, a cover sheet and a data form. The data form has what we call blocks of information, organized as blocks A through F. This table shows the sections, file type, and how they are to be submitted. This information is also presented in the APR data form in the Notes tab. Here's a list of documents that the OME recommends you have handy when completing and reviewing your APR. The most recent APR instructions, your approved application, your grant award notification, known as the GAN, last year's APR for total persisters, the grantee workbooks, and the new resource, which is the pre-submission checklist. In a moment, I will review the new resource, the pre-submission checklist. Here is a screenshot of the optional grantee workbook that you might use to organize data before you fill out your APR. It was included in the listserv announcement on APR materials. As a reminder, this workbook is optional. The workbook includes 2 tabs that feature columns where you can input information about your students. The first tab includes will help you tally or aggregate enrollment and other totals. This slide includes the second tab of the workbook. It includes a row for each student. Please do not submit the optional grantee student workbook to the OME. since it includes personally identifiable information known as PII. PII is a FERPA term referring to identifiable information that is maintained in education records and includes direct identifiers, such as a student's name or identification number, indirect identifiers, such as a student's date of birth, or other information which can be used to distinguish or trace an individual's identity, either directly or indirectly through linkages with other information. Again, please do not submit this workbook to the OME. Once you fill out all the information on the second tab, it will automatically populate the cells on the first tab, which you can see here. That will summarize information that you need for your APR. We hope you will find it helpful. This year, we also shared a new resource at the HEP and Camp Annual Directors Meeting, the APR pre-submission checklist. This resource can be found on the OME website. The pre-submission checklist is a list of items you should review before sending your APR cover sheet and data form to the OME. You do not need to submit this checklist to the OME. The first tab covers the APR cover sheet. There's a list of items you should review for accuracy and completeness. The first column describes the item on the cover sheet, and the second column has a drop-down you can use during your review to flag anything missing or incorrect. The final column is a place to add notes. For example, you could write missing approving federal agency next to item 9C, which is a common error that we see. All of your notes from the cover sheet and data form are compiled on the last tab as a summary, listing the items you should update before submitting your APR. Here's the next tab for the HEP APR data form. The CAMP tab is similar. The first column describes how to check the accuracy of each item. This usually involves comparing one number in one row against another number in another row, or with a number from another document. Again, the second column has a drop-down to flag anything missing or incorrect. The final column is a place to add notes, which will be compiled with your cover sheet notes in the last tab. We hope this resource will help you complete your APRs this year. Next, we'll review the APR cover sheet, which includes a few updates for this year. For some background information, the cover sheet is a form the department uses for various discretionary grant programs. The OME does not determine the questions in the form. This year, the cover sheet form updates were released after the OME updated the HEP and CAMP APR instructions. So we are including additional instructions for new questions in this presentation. The cover sheet is a Word document and must be submitted as a PDF. Please use the cover sheet that we sent via the listserv. This is the most up-to-date version with the new questions and includes the reporting period year, July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024. First, enter your general information into sections 1 through 6. Please note that section 2, grantee NCES ID number, only pertains to institutions of higher education. Nonprofit organizations do not have NCES ID numbers. In the next section on reporting period information, item 7 pertains to the 12-month budget period, which is July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024, unless, of course, you received a no-cost extension for a final year project. If you received a no-cost extension, please update the end date to reflect the date on which your grant project ended. Next, we'll focus on the Section 8 budget expenditures table. In 8A, you will enter the actual expenditure amount from last year's budget period. That is the total expenditures for 2022 through 2023. Please be sure to include both dollars and cents in this amount. In 8B, you will enter the actual expenditure amount for this reporting year's budget period. That is the total expenditures for 2023 through 2024. Again, please enter both dollars and cents. This amount must match the total expenditures that you report in Block E of the APR data form. The non-federal funds column of this table pertains to grantees who receive matching funds or participate in cost sharing. Please note that 8C, expenditures for the entire project period, only pertains to final performance reports. In item 9, you will enter indirect cost information. This section is usually completed by the business office at your institution. In 9A, please select yes or no. If you select yes, you must select one of the following options: item 9B, 9C, 9D, or 9E. This is set up slightly differently from last year's cover sheet. In 9B, if you are using an indirect cost rate agreement approved by the federal government, please enter the date range for this agreement into 9B. Note the approving federal agency and the rate. For final performance reports, you are required to select the type of rate under 9B. In item 9B, let's review a common cover sheet error. Please mark the approving federal agency. For example, if the approving federal agency is the U.S. Department of Education, known as ED or ED, please check the line to the left of ED. Please check the line to the left of ED. And if the approving federal agency is an agency other than ED, please specify the approving federal agency in the blank next to other. (9D) only pertains to restricted rate programs. Also on this slide, we are noting two new sections of the indirect cost information. The first is 9C, which asks about eligibility for the de minimis rate 10% modified total direct costs. Training programs should not check 9C. The next item 9E asks about training rate programs. We will review specific instructions for this item next. If you checked item 9B, you must complete item 9E. Here are the instructions for item 9E. Please choose only one response. Item 10 only applies if the IRB review attachment, that is attachment HS1, was attached to your GAN. Item 10 rarely applies to HEP and CAMP grantees. Please be sure to check not applicable if this section is not applicable. In item 12, please confirm that you submitted complete data on performance measures in the APR data form by checking yes. The final item, 12, must be completed by the authorized representative. Please note that electronic signatures are acceptable. Next, we will review updates to blocks B, C, and D of the annual performance reports. Here are two changes that only appear in CAMP. First, we've noticed that only a small portion of grantees have submitted data on student assessments determining IEHE enrollment, which was item C2. We have also heard that fewer schools are collecting SAT and ACT scores, and some have shared that these data are a burden to collect, since you have to request it from your institution. For these reasons, we have removed this data element. Second, we have added a definition for referred. Last year during APR season, we received some questions about how grantees should count whether a student was referred from MEP, HEP, or NFJP. We hope that by adding this definition, there will be more clarity in the instructions. And the definition of referred, under that you'll see the CAMP project recruited and or enrolled the CAMP student using information from another federal migrant program. For example, this could include receiving a student's name, contact information, or information regarding participation in MEP, HEP, or NFJP from one of these programs. Although participation in MEP, HEP, or NFJP is one of the possible avenues of eligibility for CAMP, referred does not pertain to eligibility for any of these programs and is solely a measure of communication between programs. There is only one larger update that applies to HEP only. The APR collects the number of instructional hours for all HEP enrolled students and for HEP attainers in item B1, but the instructions did not include a definition of instructional hours. We have now added it. Please report instructional hours for educational services that provide instruction designed to help students pass an examination and obtain a certificate that meets the guidelines for high school equivalency established by the state in which the project is located. HEP projects are not required to provide the instructional services for students directly. Next, we'll discuss changes that apply to both HEP and CAMP. I first want to note that these new data elements will be optional for the next reporting period, 2023 to 2024. We hope this gives you time to create a process for collecting this information before the required collection for the 2024-2025 reporting period. We heard some feedback that after the COVID-19 pandemic, it would be helpful to track and analyze data around the mode of instruction and services programs are utilizing. We have added definitions for 3 different instructional modes that we will review: in-person only, distance remote, and hybrid distance remote and in-person. Items C1C through C1F in the new data form collect the modes of instruction the project is offering and the number of students who received each mode of instruction. The number of students who received each of the 3 modes of instruction should add up to the number of students served reported in Block A. This means that students should only be reported once in this section. Here's the new definition of the in-person instructional mode, which we compiled from definitions in other Department of Education programs and feedback in the public comments. Programs with students receiving all instruction, for example, all college courses, HSE instructional hours, and services, for example, mentoring, tutoring, counseling, etc., in person, on campus, or at a designated campus location in the educational setting. This includes full-time and part-time students that receive all instruction in person on campus or in the educational setting. Please note that for location or mode of instruction, a one-off or limited virtual engagement within an in-person program does not constitute hybrid design. Here's the definition of the distance remote instructional mode. Use one or more technologies to deliver instruction and services to students who are separated from the staff member and to support regular and substantive interaction between the students and the staff member. Can occur synchronously or asynchronously and involve communication through video, audio, or computer technologies or by correspondence. Please note the following. Programs are considered distance remote programs if all of their programmatic portions, for example, instruction services, are completed remotely. Non-instructional in-person requirements, for example, determining eligibility, enrollment, do not exclude a course or program from being classified as exclusively distance remote. This definition also includes students who take distance remote classes as accessed on campus or in the educational setting. For example, a residential student may take distance remote classes in the educational setting. Lastly, here is the definition of the hybrid blended online instructional model. It's a combination of distance remote and in-person instruction or services. Programs may vary in the proportion of online instruction required for a course or program to be considered an online course or a hybrid blended online course or program. Now I will turn it over to Katrina.
Thanks, Jessica, for reviewing those definitions. We're going to now go over some questions and examples that can help us better understand how to report instructional mode. So the first question here, should services be included in the instructional mode? The answer is yes. So for example, if a student receives instruction remotely, but they receive services in person, then you would report that student as hybrid. So you want to take into account instruction and services. The second question here, what if my institution, for example, my college or university, not my project, determines the mode of instruction? So that's all right. What we're hoping and asking you all to do is to just report the instructional mode accounting for all instruction and services. So that's whether they're provided by the project or your institution. The next question we have is, what if my project is all in person, but students might have the option, for example, a remote counseling session if they are sick? So you can report the student as receiving in-person instruction and services if they join a session or a class remotely just due to a special circumstance. So again, a limited or one-off engagement does not determine the mode of instruction and services. The next question, what if my institution offers some courses online only and a student has to take an online course, but otherwise they'd be considered an in-person student? So we're asking that if an in-person student takes just one online course within the reporting period and all other instruction and services are in person, we're asking that you report that as in person. However, if a student takes more than one online course, in addition to their in-person courses, you would report them as hybrid. This is the same question that I just reviewed, but here are some examples. So you can see here that it's possible that a reporting period might cover 2 semesters. So if a student takes an online course just once, including both semesters, and everything else is in person, including courses and services, that person would fall under the in-person instructional mode. But if they take one online course each semester, in addition to in-person courses and services, then that would qualify them as a hybrid student. And here's an illustration to help us answer the question, what if a student changes instructional modes throughout a reporting period? So what we'd like you all to report is to count the student in the instructional mode in which they spent the most time. Here's some examples of how students might be switching between instructional modes and how they might be reported. So for example, the column to the left, that's headed with in-person student. So someone might start off as online, but only take their instruction and services online for 2 weeks. Then for the next 4 weeks, they're in person only for instruction and services. If you had a 6-week program, which is fairly short, but just for the purposes of illustration, you would put them as in person because they spent the majority of their time taking in-person instruction and services. Similarly, for online students, this person in the middle here started out as online. They went in person for 2 weeks, but then they had 3 more weeks of online. So because the majority of their time was online only, they would be an online student. Then you have a hybrid student, and you can see that for 4 weeks, they were taking a mix of in-person and online instruction and services. And then they finished out with just 2 weeks of online only instruction and services. So that would be a hybrid student. So with the addition of these new instructional modes, we wanted to avoid confusion with commuter and residential classifications. So you'll see in the APR instructions for this year, we've updated the definitions for commuter and residential students. Please make sure you're distinguishing from the modes of instruction, which is about where the student takes classes and receives services, and distinguish that with residential and commuter, which refers to whether the student lives on campus or in the educational setting. So for example, a commuter student is a student who lives at home and commutes to the site of the project. A commuter student is not the same as a distance or remote student as referenced in the modes of instruction. So commuter students can receive any of the 3 modes of instruction. Then a residential student lives away from home at the site of the project. So again, a residential student could receive any mode of instruction. They might be living at the site of the project, but they might be taking distance remote classes. So just want to point that out. And if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And now we'll check in and do a little check for understanding on these new instructional modes. So the first example we have here, see if you can figure out which instructional mode this student would be classified under. So Alex is a commuter student who attends courses for their first academic year of college in person. Alex also attends camp advising sessions in person. During the reporting period, Alex had to take one course online because the college did not offer an in-person version of the course. So, how should Alex's instructional mode be reported in the 2023-2024 budget period? Is Alex in person, remote, or hybrid? And so we are going to reveal the answer here. So if you don't know yet, you can pause the video. Alex is an in-person student because they only took one online course because that was the only way it was offered during the reporting period. So example 2, Sophia is a HEP student who attends counseling sessions online. She also attends all HEP instruction online. During the reporting period, Sophia had to meet with a recruiter in person to establish eligibility and enroll for HEP. So how should Sophia's instructional mode be reported in the 23-24 budget period? Is Sophia in person, remote, or hybrid? So again, we will reveal the answer. Sophia is an online student. So just remember that a one-off or limited in-person engagement, such as enrollment or eligibility, determining eligibility, does not preclude a student from being classified as online. Okay, and our last example, Eduardo is a camp student who regularly attends all college courses in person. His institution does not offer online instruction. He also attends camp study sessions in person. He regularly joins camp tutoring sessions online. So how should Eduardo's instructional mode be reported in the 23-24 budget period? Is Eduardo in person, remote, or hybrid? So Eduardo would be hybrid because Eduardo is attending some of his services in person, his instruction in person, but he also receives services online. So that would be hybrid. Okay, great. So we'll move on to the last change to the APR for HEP and Camp for this year. So now this year, the final performance report for HEP and Camp will require the submission of the final project evaluation, which is going to begin in the 2024-2025 reporting period. So this is optional for 2023-2024. We also understand there might be some confusion around this change. So we aren't changing the grant. The final project evaluation has been required for HEP and Camp since at least 2016, and this change is just to collect the evaluations that have already been required. And if you want to, you can refer back to the selection criteria of the funding application, and you'll notice that a project evaluation is clearly specified there. The selection criteria from the most recent notice inviting applications are linked at the bottom of this slide. And so this means that projects are expected to conduct project evaluations that are described in their approved applications. So the applications for funding were scored on the extent to which the proposed evaluation methods would produce promising evidence about the project's effectiveness. So we understand that project evaluation is still a learning area for many. One area of confusion we've heard about is the difference between the final project evaluation that's required in the selection criteria and other types of evaluations, like performance evaluations. So this table here summarizes the differences between these types of evaluations, as well as the final performance report itself. So the FPR is essentially APR data, so the same form, with just a couple of additional questions that summarizes the project's performance, which OME uses for a variety of purposes that we reviewed at the start of the presentation. So we also understand that some projects like to evaluate their project's overall performance in a more in-depth way, or they may ask a mentor to conduct an evaluation of their program in the first few years. to identify areas of improvement. These are like performance evaluations, which are a really helpful managerial tool. They could include staff or student interviews or surveys, observations, summaries of descriptive data. And these types of evaluations can be useful for making decisions about the program overall, but they do not meet the requirements of promising evidence for the final project evaluation. So the evaluation that OME will begin collecting, the final project evaluation, which you see all the way on the left of this slide here, is designed to produce promising evidence, meaning we should be able to gain insight from these studies about which strategies work or do not work for HEP and CAMP. Rather than summarizing the results of a project more broadly, the final project evaluation examines the effects of a single project component, such as the evidence-based practice you identified in your logic model in your application. So let's say, for example, your project used Check and Connect. Your final project evaluation might examine whether students who received the Check and Connect intervention performed better than students who did not. The purpose of these final project evaluations are to help create the evidence base for what works for migratory students. Key parts of the definition for promising evidence are on the slide here, but more resources on evaluation are available on the OME website, and we'll also be hosting another webinar related to evaluation this fall to continue the discussion. However, we want to note that the most important part of fulfilling the evaluation requirement is to make sure you understand what was proposed for an evaluation design in your approved application. Please make sure you review your application to understand the evaluation that was proposed, and feel free to reach out to your program officer with questions. We've already met with a couple of projects to answer questions about their evaluation design, and we are always willing to talk with grantees about that. So again, the evaluation requirement has been part of the HEP and CAMP selection criteria since 2016 because OME understands the importance of gathering evidence about what works for our programs. OME needs to collect the evaluations to better understand how our program staff can support grantees as well. And this will help us in two major ways. So the first one is evidence about practices that work or don't work for HEP and CAMP is currently really lacking in the field. Evaluations that have statistically significant findings could help us provide key learnings and guidance to the field. Also, evaluations could help OME understand some of the challenges grantees may face in implementing the evaluation requirement itself, and thus help OME provide targeted technical assistance around evaluation. And finally, here's an overview of how these new data elements, the evaluation and the instructional mode, will be implemented. So for reporting period 2023-2024, APRs are due October 17th, 2024. The new data elements, including instructional mode and the final project evaluation for any grantee that submits a final performance report, are optional. We certainly encourage you to include these in your submissions and to reach out with questions. In reporting period 2024-2025, which is next year, these new data elements will be required. I also want to note, OME recommends beginning to prepare for the final project evaluation as soon as possible, ideally in year one, if you can. This means you might need to create an evaluation project plan, talk with a contractor or other partners, identify data sources, collect data, set up control groups. All of those things are important to think about before the end of the grant. So from here, we'll go into a little break. The next section continues with the next video reviewing the APR Block A definitions. And you can feel free to pause in between viewing the two videos if you'd like to think about how you'll collect the new data elements or review the evaluation section of your project application and think about any next steps you may want to take. When you're ready, please move on to part 2 on the second video. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you there.